Before we start, I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the killing of James Foley today. I think we're all considering ourselves storytellers in one way or another in this room, and I don't want to ever lose sight of the great risk that journalists take to be able to deliver news and stories to us. So just wanted to make sure I said that. So with that, we are very happy to have Natalie DiBlasio here with us tonight for our last one. Natalie DiBlasio is a breaking news reporter with USA Today and a serious rising star within the journalism community in DC and I think across the country too. Natalie writes both for the print edition and many of the online platforms, and also hosts her own franchise, if I can say that, on USA Now, called Newsbreak with Natalie DiBlasio. And we'll talk a little bit about the multimedia platforms that are within USA Today, as well as the traditional print and online that you're working for. Two things, I see some phones out and I see people tweeting, and that's a good thing. You should be, don't put your phone down. All I'll ask is that you tag it with hashtag CFox10. We've got the conversation going too. I'm at Carrie Fox and at N DiBlasio.
With an I, because now with the mayor of New York, everyone puts an E. It's DiBlasio. So.
Thank you. So a little more about Natalie before we get started. So she has written, blogged, live tweeted on everything from the Aurora Theater massacre to the Navy Yard shootings to the National Spelling Bee competition. So you get to throw some fun things in there too. But your day job, you're managing some pretty weighty stories and some pretty weighty issues. And what you may not know about Natalie is that she's covering the breaking news of the day, and she may not always be on the scene where the news is breaking, but I think you have an equally difficult job in that Natalie is often tasked with being the one that needs to call the families of the victims to learn as much as you can about who that person was and what their life was like before their life was taken. And so I know you needed to do that for the Aurora Theater massacre. You needed to do that for several other stories recently. So I want you to, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about what that is like and how you ever prepare yourself to have to pick up a phone and make that call.
It's not easy at all. I would say I'm young. I'm 24, and I'm as young as a 24-year-old can be in the industry. A lot of my colleagues are in their 50s or older and have been doing it for a long time. So I think one of the reasons I'm picked to make a lot of these calls to victims' families is because don't have a tough skin at all. I mean, I am totally emotionally devastated every time that I leave work after I make one of these calls. The one that resonated with me the most was the Aurora Theater shooting. And a month after that, if you guys remember, that was like the Batman Theater shooting, which just still gives me chills. It makes me want to cry even thinking about it. But after a month had passed, we wanted to do a profile on everyone that had been in the theater that had survived, anyone that wanted to talk to us. We didn't have any specific questions for them. We just wanted to find out what they wanted to say and give them an opportunity to say it. So I was tasked with calling, I think, 33 of the 70 or some people who survived that shooting that were in the theater. And every day after I finished doing that, I came home, and I was telling you earlier, I mean, I was in tears every day because I was calling someone who had lost a loved one or had been sitting with someone who fell on top of them and that's why they survived. Or there was a football player who was in high school who had been shot through the wall in a different theater and gotten hit in the side of the face. So I had to talk to him about, if he was going to be able to do his dream, which was play football. And that was so emotionally hard for me when I got home. When I was at work, though, the first time I picked up the phone, I was horrified that the person would think that I was disrespecting them, asking them to talk to me about something so personal, but I actually found the opposite. And I don't know if it's because I talked to a family that was in need. It was a family of, I think, 3 that were in the theater, and English was not their first language. And they were missing a lot of the news coverage about how people were donating to Aurora and they could get the money. They didn't know it all, and they were getting heaps of medical bills and didn't understand. And I realized, just because I called, I can call the police and say, go there, and just someone translate for them and tell them that there's money available or someone available to help them. And that kind of gave me the motivation to realize that these people who maybe aren't as articulate because their job isn't to communicate, need someone that can tell their story. And my story for this family was that because English is their second language, they weren't able to reach the help that they needed. And then I called another family who had a child die, and they were able to tell me just how heartbreaking and devastating it was to have someone they never even knew come and steal their baby from them. And at first I thought that they would be mad at me for wanting to hear about a private detail, but instead I was able to help them say what they wanted to say in a way that everyone could understand. So after those first calls went that way, I was kind of able to realize that my job was important. And if someone didn't want to talk to me, which many don't, then I just say, like, thank you so much for your time. I really even appreciate you picking up the call. It is so much more important that you put this phone down and get any help you need than that I pry an answer out of you. And it's important that we report the news because it's super important that we know what bad people are doing to innocent people. But is one quote from one victim's family going to change your lives forever? No, but if I pry it out of them, it might ruin their lives. So more often than not, they're really willing to talk to me, but I have to be ready for them to say no. And that first Aurora Theater shooting really showed me that I can tell someone's story or I can protect someone's privacy, and either way I'm doing them a service by offering them the opportunity. But then I leave work where it stops being about me doing a job for them and it starts being about that I just got off the phone with a mother who lost a baby, or I got off the phone with someone who will be blind forever, or someone who is never going to be able to walk again after the Boston massacre. And then it's less about how I'm telling their story, and it's more about how I'm a human having to hear all these heartbreaking stories and then like go home and people, I don't know, I'm supposed to
forget it all.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this earlier, that we have a friend named Mike Walter, who's also a reporter at USA Today for a while, who wrote a documentary called Breaking News, Breaking Down. And it's about the trauma that reporters go through when they're covering a crisis situation. And you don't think about that often, that a reporter, especially one like you, who is seeing and talking to a lot of experience a lot of challenging things in the moment, that you've got a lot of trauma that you have to deal with too. So you've had an interesting way that you manage your stress. And if you can tell us a little bit about the Runner's Breakfast blog and the role that that's played for you in your ability to manage what you're seeing every day.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, just to kind of exemplify how not even being on the scene can totally emotionally rattle you. We had people out in Aurora during the Aurora shooting. I was at my desk at USA Today in McLean, Virginia, totally safe, making these calls, still devastated. And I got to go to Madonna's first concert that she had in the US, which, if anyone remembers, made headlines because she pulls out fake guns and does all this dancing, and a bunch of people had asked her not to do that, including Colorado when she toured near there. And I was completely panicked when she did that because I was thinking, I'm here, my mom's here, all my favorite people are here with me. This is the first night in the US, anyone that knows this is happening, this is the perfect time to target people. And I had to sit down and pull myself together. And I hadn't even been on the scene.
Social media. So you, I know, are active on social media. Obviously, USA Today, you just said, is typically the way they break the news with the breaking news alert. How do you use social media platforms to vet sources and to verify facts?
So I will use social media to find sources, but I won't ever, unless it's a verified account, I will either find a source and then call their place of work that they have listed to make sure that they're a real person. I'll check them in the white pages, but we cannot use a source's information without making sure we're not just plucking off of Twitter, unless we're writing a story about how's Twitter responding to this or that, and then we can embed tweets to show. But if we're actually saying, this person's mother says this person broke in, then we need to, find the mother's Twitter, find her place of work, call and make sure she's a legitimate person, check in the white pages. So a great deal of work goes in. Twitter has not made it easier to just pull information. It's made it easier to find people to pull information from.
Okay. So one more question for you, and I know we are out of time. So I will ask a question. Okay, so we talked a little bit about USA Today's multimedia platform, USA Now. Tell me a little bit, if you can, about Gannett's plans to continue to invest in the multimedia platform. We all knew USA Today as the print edition, which in many ways, yes, it still is the print edition, but there are so many other elements to USA Today now. So where is Gannett going? What does it see as the future of storytelling?
Well, I don't know if I can speak on behalf of Gannett, especially since Gannett just split to a digital side and a publishing side. But the publishing side still has all of the newspapers and their online platforms which have these videos. For us, we're finding that our audience wants information on a number of platforms. A growing number of our story hits are coming from mobile and tablet audiences. It's diminishing on a computer front. So you'd think that like print's diminishing, but not just print, the people that are on their computers, because everyone's now on their iPhones. So making things friendly for mobile readers, which means, and sometimes it's easiest to watch a video. Sometimes it's easiest to listen to a podcast, which is something that I think we're toying with, maybe trying. The length of our stories is something that we're changing. A big push at USA Today is Social Tuesdays, where we're asking the reporters to really try to go above and beyond sharing on social, because you need to be tweeting your stories, but also tweeting facts from your stories. And we're trying to reach our audience where our audience is. And I think that we're doing a good job doing that, but how to monetize where our audience is the question that if anyone has the answer to, I am taking calls. Because we don't know.
It's tough. I have one last question, which I will save for the very end. But Natalie's offered to stay for a little extra time here, so if anyone in the audience would like to ask her a question on the topic of breaking news or social or whatever makes sense.
Yeah.
I would just like a quick follow-up. You said you're changing the length of stories, shorter or longer?
Shorter. Stories that are meant to be longer, we're selecting them to have them be long pieces that are broken down into chunks within themselves that maybe have like a bold headline. But in general, we're trying to shorten the length of stories. We have this completely heartbreaking tool that shows you how far your audience scrolls down. Turns out not much. So we're not really, so we always know the news needs to be up top, but people aren't reading because they have time to read. Many people aren't thinking like, oh, it's my lunch break, I'm gonna like scroll through USA Today. They're thinking, I'm interested in this topic, Googling it, who's ever comes up first, reading what they're interested in, and then stopping. So, yeah, shorter.
Wow.
So in the shorter storytelling, do you find that writing or creating a video is more attention gathering?
It's really hard to know because we have it set so that the videos are on top of our story pages. To be totally honest, it's because we know how to monetize a rolling video. You put an ad in the beginning. Right, so fabulous. So we put those as often as we can on top of a story, and then that will play, and it seems that people are watching them for as long as they're on the page. So I can't really answer that, but do you understand what I'm saying? Sure. That they're not so much stopping the video to read instead, and because of that, I can't really tell you where their interests are, but I do know that we're putting more videos themselves without full stories on our tablet platforms, and they're doing really well.
You find that more helpful in telling a story or less helpful, or a new skill you have to learn?
It is a totally new skill that I have to learn. I was hired as a print reporter, and then one day the editor came by and asked me if I would like to be on camera, and I was like, yeah, sure, I would. Sure. And I had no experience, and he brought someone in that taught us, and I spent a lot of time outside of work seeking critique from other anchors in the area, and just watching everything I could to learn how to do that job. And then a few months later, he came in and asked me if I could learn to shoot and edit video. And I said, of course, that I would do that too, because all these things are going to they're going to be relevant at some point. I don't know what is the best way to hear a story, but I do know that everyone is different in how they want to hear a story, and if I'm hoping to be in journalism longer than the 24 years that I've been alive so far, I better do it all. And I think that that's how a lot of people in the newsroom are feeling, of all ages, and a lot of people in our newsroom are jumping on all the platforms too, so that's really good.
Do you feel then that it becomes sort of the way the news is being digested as sound bites and shorter and shorter and shorter, that the same is going to happen to reporters like yourself, that instead of really becoming an expert as a print reporter or in video, that you're going to need to be a jack of all trades? And how does that affect, excuse me for being so blunt, but the quality of the stories? Yeah,
I am so with you, and I think that what you just said is totally on point. I am not asked to focus on a particular beat. I'm not asked to focus in a particular way. Let me just tell you what my day is, okay? So
good.
I get an assignment. Say it's on the Hill. Let's use this example. I covered a story about So GM recalled a number of cars because there was a faulty ignition switch. And the families of people who died in these cars have been coming to Capitol Hill trying to settle how much money they're going to get and are they actually going to fix these cars. And because they like how I cover families, and I love doing it because I love telling their stories, I was assigned to cover the families, not the hearing. And so I was out there with the families. So I had to wake up. I got up maybe at like 6 a.m. to write a story to publish online as soon as the press conference started, so that as the press conference was happening, I could email in feeds to a reporter that could work it into the story. We call that our rewrite reporter, takes our feeds and works in what people on the scene are saying. So 6 a.m. I write that. I send it in probably by 8 to publish at 9, have it go through the copy desk. Then at 9, I leave then I schedule some tweets after I write the story with info from my story to go before I'm to be at the press conference.
What information are you using to write that story?
I will have done interviews the day before, any press information. It's nothing that's like breaking news, just some background information. For this one, I wrote like, here's why they're here. Okay. This is what's going on with GM. This is some background on the families. Nothing in depth, nothing that's going to be our big lead story of the day, but just so that the audience, if they say there's a press conference going on, they can click it and say like, oh, this is what might happen. Then I go to the press conference as some tweets that I've scheduled this morning are ticking off, and then I'm supposed to live tweet what's happening at the press conference, which is pictures, which is sending vines, which is quotes, anything, the number of people that are there, the atmosphere, as I'm writing feeds to send back to our rewrite reporter to be putting into our story while I'm shooting video on my iPhone. Then I am working with the editor, with the rewrite reporter back at USA Today to make sure that my story is the most up-to-date as everything is happening. Then, when it is over, I hopefully have gotten all the interviews that I've needed, tweeted the sound bites from those interviews. Then I get back to my computer, edit the video that I've shot in Final Cut, and then upload it to the web to go on top of that story. Then I start...
The story that you wrote at 6 in the morning.
At 6 in the morning. That's been updated. Right. Then I start an entire news story for the print paper that is on what happened, what is the news of the day, because the running feed of what happened at the press conference isn't the news, it's going to be its impact. So then I've published the story, and then I've written another story for the paper.
And you can only do one story like that a day. That is a day.
Right. No, that is a day. And that isn't every day, but that's probably some weeks, 2 days a week, 2 separate days. And then there are some days where I'll walk into work and one of our upper editors will come over and say, this was actually yesterday, what is happening in Ferguson is getting a lot of attention, and there's a lot of names flying around. We need profiles on all the key players. So I just started 6 story files, called every single person I could get contact info for in Ferguson, and just started churning out profiles so that anytime we linked to them or talked about them in a story, we could link to these profiles. So my days are all over the place, but I'd say what exemplifies what I'm being expected to do is that day with the GM shooting.
That's what I'm saying, is like...
And you're right. How much better would it be if there was someone who was totally focused on doing a video and totally focused on doing a story? And the sad thing is, I don't think we know, because I don't think that there are many outlets that have people to designate that way. So I don't think that by having me juggle all those things, and I have a lot of energy, so I'm up for it. But having me do all those things, we're not falling behind in the quality of what everyone else is doing, because it's not like these other papers have 3 or 4 people there. So I think that, I think it would be great if we could have people do really in-depth stuff.
What you were trained in.
Right. Don't think it's going to happen.
When you are tweeting live like that, are you tweeting on behalf of the main USA Today handle, or are you sending your tweets into them?
No, I tweet on my account, and they will retweet or they'll rewrite into their own tweets if they're going to be tweeting. Sometimes if I'm running the website, which I do one day, or I used to do one day a week, I will be manning the social media accounts, and it's really clear what is and isn't acceptable to do from the USA Today. They have there's no questions. It's just things that can be verified, nothing opinionated. We're not sassy during breaking news situations. It's not a joke. So,
last few questions. Go ahead.
So you've done a lot of stories on shootings, and then something like the Senate not passing gun control happens, and presumably your people who've covered a lot of shootings have to write about it. So how much does the avoidance of coming off as biased for political stories weigh on you, or is it something you just don't even think about it?
We have a Washington bureau so we've got people who cover the Capitol, some White House reporters, and those folks the ones that are covering those kinds of things, and they are rarely on the scene of shootings, and they're not the kind of people that will call on for things. We do have beat reporters in our newsroom. I'm just not one of them, and the breaking news team doesn't have beat reporters. But so I think that they avoid that, which is a really great question, is that we just have separate reporters do those kinds of things. And I don't know if it's consciously to avoid someone being biased, as much as it is that there's so much to cover on the Hill that we can't have them do my day on the Hill and then also cover something like that.
But is that because I know like so many people are always like, well, I don't read this because they're biased, but like, is that something that kind of like weighs on journalists a lot?
To not be biased.
They think of themselves as biased, or is it more of like is having that label more something that people outside of journalism
that's a great question, and I think that it is going to be different for everyone, but I can speak for me and for USA Today. USA Today is a national paper, which means that we're in all of the states. So if we were to go one way or the other, we would lose half of our readership. So it's really important in our newsroom to just stick to the facts. And what I was taught in college, I don't know if I was taught it in a class or just what I learned through some internships, is that my opinion on something matters so much less than someone who is actually involved in something's words. So if I were to write a story and say, like, I think this is totally wrong, I mean, not going to say those words, but if I put it out there in that way, people are going to stop reading it that disagree with me. But if I'm just to present the facts, then people from both sides are going to read. And one thing that was really, I think, a testament to this was I covered the March for Life in Washington, which is an anti-abortion protest. And I had people from both sides furious at me for my coverage of it. And I was like, score! Because, like both of them were like, how can you be like pro-life and how can you be pro-choice? And I was like, I think that you guys are spot on with my not doing either. I was just talking about, I tweeted a picture. There was a mother, and she had 12 children, and I tweeted a picture saying, this mother has 12 children because they don't believe in birth control, and she believes that, it would be horrible to have an abortion and to not have any of these children. And everyone who agreed with her was like, yay, go her. And everyone who disagreed was like, this is spot on why like people need to be having birth control. But you couldn't tell what I thought. And that's because it's more important that people know that a mother with 12 children feels this way than it is for you to have it would limit my audience, and I think that journalists have a good idea of that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the more diverse your angry audience is tends to be a mark of success, I would say. As sad as that is.
Last question from the group. Anyone else?
What life path lands you a job like this at the age of 24? How did you get the job?
So I went to the University of Vermont, which doesn't have a journalism program or a media program, and I accidentally took a journalism class. I didn't even want to take it, but the grant writing class that I wanted to be in, which I don't know why I wanted to be in that, but it was full, so I was like, all right, I have to take this one just so that I've got a spot to fill this requirement. And the journalism professor said, if you get an article published in the student newspaper, then you get like plus a letter grade, or plus a number on your final grade. And I cared a lot about my grades. I didn't care a lot about journalism, and I was petrified to have someone else read my writing because that just wasn't something I was interested in. But I figured, whatever, I'll go forth and I won't see anyone in this class again, and then I'll just be on my way. And my first article was on UVM is up north in a dark place where it's super cold, and seasonal affective disorder is really serious up there, seasonal depression. So I went and talked to some doctors. My goal was to write a story on like how many people are depressed at UVM. Like, okay. And it turned out that they were saying some of the things that the university had done, which was put seasonal affective disorder lights, like actual UV lights in the student center to help students like get some more, I don't know, positivity out of the sun, I guess. And so I called the makers of these lights, and they were saying, well, are there signs on these lights or anything? Because you should only be under them for like 30 minutes. But kids are like sleeping. Who's like studying for finals? Like you're under there for like 3 days straight during finals. And it turns out that that's like super dangerous. It's like it's not good news. And the university had like dozens of them all over the student center for months with no signs. It's the dead of winter in Vermont. And this story, like everyone loved it. And I was like, that was so cool. And then the university like redid their policy on these lights, and I was thinking like, yeah, okay. And then the paper asked me to write a story the next weekend, and a kid jumped out a window in a dorm and broke his leg. And it turns out that's the first time the university had ever put all freshmen in one dorm, and it had a higher rate of crime and injury and overdoses compared to any dorm ever. So I wrote that story, and I was thinking, like, this journalism thing is awesome. Like, this is so cool. A bummer about, like, the seasonal vitamin store lamps and you know, like, the kid with the leg. But it was just really cool to get to go and tell these people's stories. And then I realized, like, if I just know that much more about this university from those two stories, like, if I do journalism, I can know, like, everything. And that's what I told one of my, like, now really close friends, and she just reminded me of it the other day. She was saying, like, why are you doing this? Like, I was bummed about covering some shooting. And I must have told her then, like, well, because I want to know everything, like, don't you? And, like, who else has a past to learn all the time about all kinds of different things other than a journalist? And she reminded me of it 2 years after I said it, and I'm glad she did, because I kind of lost sight of this fabulous opportunity to know all these things. Anyway, I stuck with the student paper, got an internship at a local paper there, and then I was at a party reading the news on my phone, and someone came and sat next to me and said, like, are you actually at a party reading the news on your phone? And I was like, well, you know, but yeah. And he was like, you should just talk to my dad then, because he would do that too. And I was like, well, I want to be a journalist, and I'm taking every journalist that I can find out to coffee. So, like, what's your dad's email? And then it ends with at usatoday.com, and I was like, what's your name again? Like, I just met your son, and I would love to, like, buy you coffee and have you tell me, like, anything, / like, let me breathe the air you're breathing and see if that can help me out. And he took me on a tour of USA Today, and he encouraged me to send in my application for an internship. Got the internship, came in like an hour before my editor every day, left an hour afterward. I mean, I just worked so hard. I got a job down here. I came down and moved in with a family, so I didn't have to live with, like, anyone that was fun, because all I wanted to do was, like, claw my way into a job with this internship. And then my internship ended. I cried for like 2 days straight, because it was the happiest I'd ever been. I was learning, like, everything about everything I wanted to know, because I just had so many opportunities. And then I was able to freelance for them, and they offered me a job after I graduated. So it was so much luck, because the opportunity was there at that time, but a lot of hard work and just a lot of, like, nonstop trying and knowing that I wanted to work there, and just doing everything that I needed to do, including going to my professors at one point and saying, I think I have an opportunity to get a job at USA Today, so my priority is going to be freelancing for them. I don't want you to think that I'm disrespecting you in your classes if I'm doing less work than I've been doing before, because this is what my goal is. And they really worked with me to make sure that I could get credit for some of the stuff I was doing at USA Today, or meet with them and turn in things a bit late if I had a big story that I could write. So it was a great support system, a lot of work, and, like, more luck than I think that one person should get in their life, probably.
I think that USA Today is the lucky one, because you bring such compassion and honesty and realism to the work that you do, and I know how hard the work is that you do, and I've just heard bits and pieces of it. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So open.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was so much fun.
So feel free to hang around. We have a lot of food in the conference room and the bar in my office, which makes for a good Wednesday. So enjoy. Thank you for coming.